local costume, as those of you from Whistler may remember my chainsaw and lumberjack outfit. So those who don't know, I didn't go all out here, but I do have my Berlin Cortex Records t-shirt. So excited to be here. Anyways, welcome. I'm going to pick up a little bit on the talk yesterday, and instead of an icebreaker, start with some ice. When I think about the world of AI and data, I think a lot about it in the last few years. I often feel like I'm staring out at this huge sheet of ice. It's incredibly clear that Mozilla needs to fit somewhere in this landscape, but it's not clear where to start. AI and data is central to the computing paradigm of today, but it's not where we've been, and it's not clear where we start to break through. So that's what actually led me to the icebreaker, which I finished with yesterday. I think we need to carve a path of vision and imagination around where we go and where the world could go with our values in a world of AI and data. And it's not where we are now, and I don't think we need to feel anxious. We have a lot to do beyond this, as we talked about yesterday. We're talking through the whole week. But I do think it is in part where we need to go. And so that's what this set of talks is today. It's a short set of lightning talks by people we've begun to gather around us, the foundation, people in the company who are thinking about trustworthy AI. And it's just the hopes that we get your brains going this morning. This is not a planning talk or like specifically what Mofo or anybody else is going to do. It's just hopefully to get your brains going and to encourage you to weave some of this thinking into your own work. So sit back, relax, really interested to hear what you have to say. And of course, often as we get into this, as the Mofos and I go out talking more about trustworthy AI, we get asked, what are we talking about? It's pretty straightforward. It's a fuzzy term. We're talking about machine learning and large amounts of data and using sensors and pattern recognition. So whatever you want to put in that bucket, that's fine with me. I think the key piece is what I said a moment ago. This is the computing paradigm, or a big part of the computing paradigm, that defines our time. Much like the web and network computing defined our time, defined what was possible 20 years ago. So if we think about our history and we think about it in that way, it's important for us to start figuring out how to move through the ice. Now, there's a bunch of other questions I often get as we talk more and more about this. Why? Why now? Why us? And when I think about that why a little bit, why does this matter in the way that the web mattered? And we got that question then, certainly in all of my time at Mozilla. People say, well, why the open web? Why do we care? The web is nice. And so why think about trustworthy AI? I think some of the reasons are becoming quickly evident. If this is the dominant way that we think about building digital things with sensors, with machine learning, with pattern recognition that goes into facial recognition, that structures what we think is possible, what is imaginable. And what's imaginable, what's possible, and also what's happening can get pretty dystopian. It already is. But even if we set the dystopian visions aside, the massive growth of consumer devices filled with AI, collecting data through sensors that fill our homes, like we talked about yesterday, raises questions. Many people, oh, actually, I was going to ask, how many people have at least one smart home device in their house? This is Mozilla. We actually are pretty conservative. It's a small number. And how many of you who have a smart home device feel a little creeped out by it? So, at least our percentages of people with smart home devices who feel creeped out is about right. As we weave AI into mainstream consumer technologies, which is happening, has happened, many of the same concerns that one might have in the dystopian scenarios are still there. There's concerns with privacy, there's concerns with security, there's concerns with bias, there's current concerns around transparency, there's concerns around centralization of power, and ultimately there are concerns of who's accountable if things go wrong. So whether you look at the dystopian end of things or you look at the world of consumer technology that surrounds us every day, it is clear to me and the why that where AI goes, having trustworthy AI is a major internet health issue. And that's why we're focusing most of the foundation's internet health movement building efforts in this area. And it's not a new program. It's still about our internet health programs like our fellows, the Internet Health Report, MozFest, our campaigns and so on are moving in this direction. I think it's also why you're seeing more folks across Mozilla looking at questions related to AI and data, whether that's the fact that we have that as an innovation theme, which Katerina will come back up and talk about a little bit in a moment, whether that's things like common voice and deep speech, whether that's Pocket, starting to look at where machine learning fits in, but from our values, or things like federated learning and Prio that people are looking at in Firefox as we start to touch more and more data. So this is something that many people across Mozilla are asking, what is the Mozilla way to work with data, work with machine learning, and something I think we all need to be digging into. So then the other question we get is, why now? And the why now, there's a bunch of very specific reasons for us and what we're building. But the bigger reason is the agenda, the norms, who controls things, the laws and the rules that get made are happening now, are getting set now. And that's really, really clear. You see it in the media. That's partly hype. But you see it in Brussels and Washington. And you see it, obviously, in engineering work and actually building things. So the agenda is being set now. And the good thing is there's also, in a lot of that conversation, many people trying to set that agenda in a good way like us. This is a map from Harvard of 47 different sets of AI principles from groups like AI Now and Amnesty International, and people who we work with, all really trying to say it's time to set the right agenda now and build values into it. It's very much like the Mozilla Manifesto. So it's a time where the agenda is being set. It's also a time for us to step in and where a lot of people ask us to step in because others are trying to figure out how do we send the agenda in the right direction. And we should be a part of that, in my opinion. The last question I get a lot is why us? And I'm not going to answer that because, that would be not the right thing for me to answer. But I am going to ask somebody who is close to us, but now is actually somebody on that map you just saw, somebody who works at AI Now. So I'm going to ask Amba Kak, who used to be on our policy team, but is now the Director of International Policy at AI Now at New York University, to come up and offer some reflections on where she thinks we might fit in. Amba. Thank you.
So hi, thank you so much for having me, Mark. Many of you know me. It feels really good to be back here, and it hasn't even been that long. Not long ago, I was here at Mozilla. I was working on policy, and I've now taken one foot out of Mozilla. And as part of my day job, I spend a lot of time talking to technologists, to activists, social scientists, and lawyers towards all in some way working towards this goal of what Mark described as trustworthy AI. Many of these people are also asking that kind of prior question of why AI at all. Now, here are a few things that I've understood. The problems with AI are not new, obviously, but they are accelerated. So at Mozilla, you've been diagnosing the health of the internet. So in your language, I would say that the pathologies are getting much worse. So with AI and with AI hype in the mix. So they're getting more opaque, more unaccountable, more divisive. But I would say most centrally, they are getting more centralized. There are a handful of companies that dominate the consumer AI space that you just heard about, many of the same companies that dominate the web. The computing capabilities, engineering resources, and data sets that are required to compete in large-scale AI means that it feels very likely, if not certain, that it will be the few rather than the many that can compete. And this is definitely breeding its own kind of despondency, because it feels fruitless. Sometimes it feels fruitless to try and change things from the outside, and perhaps many of you in this room feel that too. But Mozilla has intervened to disrupt closed technology trajectories before. And while the context has changed in so many ways, I do see many opportunities for Mozilla to do so again. One of the places I think Mozilla could start is with shaping engineering norms. Now, there are probably a few things that are troubling about developer culture today, and this picture already covers a few of them for me. But in November last year, when Microsoft's chatbot was trained on Reddit data and it became racist and misogynist within minutes, the question wasn't even how or why, but why are we even surprised? So Barbara Gross, a professor of natural sciences, looked at this problem, and she said that one way to have prevented this was, what if every time a computer scientist or an engineer logged in to write an algorithm or build a system, they had this message flash across the screen? Have you thought about the ethical implications of what you're doing? But really, it can't be about that one simple question with probably very complex answers. Instead, it is about embedding reflexivity and responsibility at every step in the development cycle. We actually have proposals, some of which are mentioned here. There's Google Model Cards, the About ML project. They're all trying to bring together a community of machine learning researchers that are championing documentation as one way of moving towards slower, safer, and more responsible engineering practices. For many reasons, I think Mozilla could be a natural fit in this conversation. The first is that I think this reflexivity and this kind of reflexivity through documentation is very core to organizational culture, and definitely can be modeled through Mozilla's own approach to data. This is an image from Mozilla's own Lean Data Practices campaign. But more practically, as you might have noticed, many of the existing attempts that I just told you come out of or are being driven by the same 3 or 4 tech companies. And so even as they are well-intentioned, there has been internal skepticism about whether this movement should be coming from those spaces. And actually, some of the people that I work with are involved in this, and many of those researchers themselves speak of Mozilla as an example of a trusted platform that might facilitate this dialogue. And speaking of platforms, here's an example of a web-based portal called distill.pub that was launched to allow for sharing of machine learning models with non-technical audiences. So as part of that non-technical audience, I would say that there is so much potential still for rich interfaces that can make machine learning models and these abstractions of AI real for wider audiences, so that they can also start learning, critiquing, and eventually building trust in how these models will operate in the real world. But focusing on engineering culture and engineers alone, I think, can lead to its own myopia, right? Because it's often engineers and data scientists don't have power towards the ends to which these systems are even deployed. And that's kind of why there is a growing political movement, especially over the last year, both within and external to the tech industry, that's demanding accountability from those who do have this decision-making power. So this is a very crowded image, and it's crowded for a reason. It represents some of the key moments of pushback that we saw in the year of 2019. So you'll see on this map facial recognition bans, suing Facebook over discriminatory ads, large-scale protests against tech's relationship with law enforcement and ICE. Now, what Mozilla does in this space is a little bit different from the pushback that you will see on the map. So it's online consumer advocacy that's actually getting users to call out companies and make changes, which first requires online users to care. Now, Mozilla's been running campaigns like this one, and I think Mark's already told you a little bit about it, trying to kind of hit the nerve of what users actually do care about. So is Alexa overhearing my conversations? Or why did I spend the last 3 hours watching a depressing YouTube spiral? These campaigns, I think, demonstrate what it means to actually meet people where they are, especially in a space where so much of our interaction with algorithms is invisibilized. We're going to hear more from fellows today about who are actually looking at different creative strategies to create consumer consciousness on these issues. But I'm going to move to my familiar area, so that's law and policy. I think what we recognize is that hard limits are more important than ever. This photo to me is so emblematic of not just the increased scrutiny on these companies, but also the fact that lawmakers are really struggling to make sense of what the right questions even are. There's going to be a lot of activity this year on this kind of omnibus AI regulation that will save us all. We've seen commitment to new regulatory frameworks from Europe, Australia, Canada. There are multiple bills floating around in the US. But I would just warn at this moment that it might be more important to actually look at the problems that are happening in more specific contexts and sectors where AI is operating, rather than these kind of one-size-fits-all solutions. So think about transparency around targeted advertising and political content, protection against tracking and profiling, red lines on biometric recognition technologies, the right to know when you are subject to an algorithmic decision and the right to object to it, algorithmic impact assessments. These are all issues where Mozilla's own policy team and fellows have already been active, and these are the fights, I think, that will be as important, if not more important, than the question of AI regulation. But I also want to take a kind of giant step back. Among metaphors of the cloud, I think we can sometimes forget that these large-scale AI systems are actually having planetary impacts. So a researcher, Emma Struble from Amherst, released a paper last year that actually revealed the massive carbon footprint of training a single natural language processing system. The computational infrastructure of big tech is today estimated to emit more carbon than the aviation industry. That's a dramatic percentage of global emissions. So when there is so much hype around the AI race, it feels like such a bold move to even question if we're running in the right direction. But that's where I think Mozilla becomes important. You're still recognized by so many within the tech industry and outside of it to be one of the few organizations that can actually ask these questions and can help resist that feeling of inevitability. I'd like to believe, and I certainly feel like I'm only 1 foot out of Mozilla, so I can't wait to work with all of you, and I look forward to conversations today and in the next few months, just to work together to try and shape both current and future trajectories of AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Amba. That was really amazing in terms of the. It's very clear the why us in part, and then why together with others. And it's great to hear that from somebody who sort of sees us now from the outside. And I want to just call out, one of the things Amba talked about is just the importance and the role that Mozilla could play, just even in that documentation piece of spreading the thinking. And I had a great conversation at CPDP, this privacy conference in Brussels last week, with Martin Lopatka and a bunch of other Firefox engineers on stuff they're doing on federated learning, and just that team trying to push out through publishing some of what they're trying. I think there's a lot, probably as we just work through the work of the next 3 years, that people look to Mozilla with credibility, and if we can share it out, have a tremendous impact through that kind of work. So it is really exciting. So just to kind of get on to the next piece, one of the things Dave Camp said yesterday morning, and he was talking about Firefox, but I think it's true with much of what we need to go through as we look to innovation in Mozilla, is we're going to need all kinds of different disciplines and all of us around the table to figure out the path forward. And with this in mind, and this trustworthy AI theme in mind, and I think just instinct in mind, a number of us have started bringing more people around Mozilla who have useful expertise and who are doing and creating different thinking on trustworthy AI. They may be staff, they may be fellows, they may be partners we're talking to. So I want to bring up 3 of those people just to give talks to kind of get your mind going on what they're doing: an engineer, a lawyer, and a designer, who are sort of examples of those people who have started to kind of come into our orbit in this space. And the first person I want to bring up is Guillaume Fellow. He's going to talk. He's a former YouTube engineer who's going to talk about some of the things that he learned building their recommendation algorithm and things he's thinking about now. So Guillaume.
Hi there. So I'm going to talk to you about an AI that you all used and that I helped develop, YouTube's recommendation engine. So more specifically, I'm going to talk about this engine became untrustworthy and why we got there. So first, some context. YouTube is huge. It's more than 1 billion hours of watch time per day. Of this 1 billion hours, 70% comes from the recommendation engine. So we have one single AI that controls 700 million hours of watch time every single day. When I was working there, I realized that this AI was creating filter bubbles. We were entering feedback loop that was recommending always the same type of content to a user. And I proposed solution. I showed to the management, oh, we could do that or that to avoid these filter bubbles. But they were not interested. They were focusing on watch time. They were focusing on advertisement revenue. So they were not interested in this solution. After I left Google, I was concerned about the recommendation. So I created a website, Algo Transparency, to see where recommendations are bringing us. What I did is that I started from searches or from channels, and then I followed recommendations. So it's kind of reverse engineering the recommendation engine and seeing where it brings people. What I noticed is that this algorithm had a habit of pushing misinformation, divisive, hateful rants, conspiracy theories. All that for a bit more watch time on ads. So in the end, we noticed that fiction was actually outperforming reality on YouTube. And that's not a surprise, because reality was never a metric. It was never an input of the system, so there was no reason it would be an output. Recently, Google DeepMind released an article, a scientific article, explaining why feedback loops in recommendation system can give rise to echo chamber and filter bubbles. And eventually, that can shift the user worldview. So that completely changed the debate on filter bubbles, because now it was something scientifically proven. And people are not debating if it's happening or not. So how did we get there? How did we get to the best engineers of the world recommending putting people into filter bubbles for the last 10 years? The first problem was the focus on engagement, and especially watch time. So it worked really well at Facebook to have this one metric, that all the companies align on this one metric, which was growth at Facebook, and which was watch time at YouTube. So ideas that were not directly linked to increasing watch time or could actually decrease watch time, all these ideas were tossed apart. So as an engineer, we just put the watch time and engagement into the loss function of our AI, and then the goal was just to make the AI as good as possible. At no point we were really thinking about the ethical implication of what we were doing. And I think that's something that's great at Mozilla, that you can think about ethical implication. You're going to be heard if you do that. It was not the case at Google. So in the end, the AI was not in Google, in the user's best interest. So for instance, the flat Earth conspiracy theory is a gold mine from the AI's point of view. People who look at the flat Earth conspiracy theory will spend hours and hours watching ads. So in the end, Google promoted the flat Earth conspiracy theories hundreds of millions of times. At no point they asked themselves, like, should it really be recommended? They were like, okay, but it's freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want. Yeah, but freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of reach. You don't have the right of an AI that doesn't care about the world to promote what you say. So this freedom of speech, freedom of reach comes from Ronnie DiResta, who is also a Mozilla Fellow. So in the last 3 years, I've been talking about these problems of misinformation from the AI. There's been also pressure from YouTube content creators on the press on all kinds of issues, from pedophilia to radicalization. And of course, there's been the Mozilla campaign of YouTube Regrets that has been showing thousands of examples of people who've been deceived by the AI. After all this public pressure, YouTube changed a lot of things last year. They made more than 30 changes. They said the reduction in watch time of harmful content was more than 70% for people who were logged out. So that's billions of hours of watch time less on crazy content that had no reason to be recommended. But problems still remain. conspiracies that are considered harmless are still massively promoted. So for instance, climate change denial is considered harmless by Google and is still promoted by the tens of millions. The AI is still putting watch time first, so it will try to trick you if it can. If your kid is watching YouTube for homework, the best AI of the world is going to try to keep him watching as long as possible, all that for 2 cents per hour. That's absurd. So deep learning engineer at Google, Francoise Chalet, who is the creator of the deep learning framework Keras, said that optimizing for a narrow, opportunistic definition of engagement is basically the same as seeking to waste the most human potential with maximum efficiency. So there is a clear consensus that we need to reverse that. Why didn't he do it? He's at Google. He has all the technology. Well, the reason is very simple. It's opposite to the business model. So Google can't do it. It has to come from somewhere else. So personally, I'm working on an extension that alerts users when an AI is not acting on their best interest. So for instance, you go on Firefox and you open YouTube, and the extension is going to tell you how the AI is trying to influence you and how you can influence the AI. Last year, we saw that pressure and transparency made a huge difference. So in 2020, we have to double down on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillaume. Thank you so much, Guillaume. And you can see why Guillaume is a Mozilla Fellow, and those are the kind of people we really, I think, want to work more with. You can also see how the work Guillaume's been doing in the last 3 years has influenced the YouTube Regrets campaign and other things we've used to help add the pressure to YouTube to make some of the kinds of changes they've already made. And as Guillaume said, we're going to do more, especially around the 2020 election, studying what's happening with things like recommendation engines and continuing to keep the pressure on, especially around transparency. One of the things to note, because you've just seen one of our fellows, you've seen one of our former fellows, you're about to see one of our newest fellows, is that about 80% of the Foundation's Mozilla Fellows this year are focused on AI-related work. And that's everything from a lot of the policy issues that Amba talked about, including AI policy in Europe, Africa, South Asia. We've got people who are working on bias and manipulation in ad targeting algorithms. We've got people looking at things like litigation to enforce AI-related clauses of GDPR, and the list goes on. And that's another example of just bringing more people around us as we try to edge in to the ice and carve a path to see what is possible. And so one of the things that I have been very compelled by is the idea that it's possible for people to have a different relationship with the platforms in regard to their data. And so we've asked Sylvie Delacroix, who's a professor in law and ethics at University of Birmingham, to join us as a fellow, and she's going to talk about some of the thinking she has, which I think is pretty exciting. Come on up. You need the...
Thank you. So I'm going to start with the word that you're all familiar with in that title, bottom-up data trust. Data. Now, data becomes valuable when it's aggregated, and it often yields power. The problem is that so far, that power has been concentrated in very few hands. So data trusts are there to make sure we can answer positively this key question. Can we return the power that stems from aggregated data to groups and individuals? And we say yes. And given the vulnerabilities at stake, it's crucial that that power is returned via the legal mechanism of trust. Okay. Now, you might ask me, why this rather bizarre poster that says Freehold Land Society? What does it have to do with this? Well, you may or may not know that actually in 19th century England, the right to vote was conditional upon land ownership. Now, in fact, these land societies are probably the most exciting way of understanding the most important aspect of this data trust proposal. And the most exciting aspect has to do with the fact that land societies were basically created to expand the right to vote and give a political voice to people who previously were completely disenfranchised. Now, the idea behind data trusts is very similar. Here, what's at stake is not the right to vote. What's at stake is the ability for us to have a say over how our data is used and for what purposes. Now, of course, in order to do this, what we do is we don't pool money in order to buy a strip of land that would then be divided up. What we do is we pool together data, or in fact, data rights. Okay. Now, the outcome of these data trusts might be just as revolutionary as those land societies were in the 19th century. I hope it need not involve at least these bloody battles like the picture illustrates. This picture was chosen by the FT with the headline, "Legal instruments exist to empower us, data subjects." Right. Well, I think the outcome of this data trust can end up reversing what is effectively a feudal structure when it comes to data governance. How so? Well, data trusts can bring together what are all too often two distinct conversations. On one hand, there are those who legitimately worry about protecting us from abuses of our data. And on the other hand, there are those who just as legitimately worry about the fact that without better data sharing, all the fancy AI tools we have at the moment will remain just that, fancy AI tools. So, because data trust can facilitate access to pre-authorized, aggregated data, this data trust can completely revolutionize data sharing practices. Importantly, and this is crucial, they can do so while addressing head-on the vulnerabilities that stem from data sharing. How? Well, at the heart of it all are the data trustees. Now, the key point about data trustees is that they have a fiduciary obligation of undivided loyalty towards the beneficiaries of the trust. And in this case, that means data subjects. Now, concretely, that means that a data trustee cannot have any form of conflict of interest. So, while a data trustee can be part of a foundation, like the Mozilla Foundation, for instance, it can't be part of a corporation. Why? Well, because you can't have undivided loyalty towards those whose rights you are exercising, while at the same time having to answer to shareholders who might press for the monetization of those people's data. So you can't be part of a corporation. Now, you might ask, are these fiduciary obligations really necessary? Isn't it a bit too complicated? Well, to answer that question, it's useful to think of data trustees as the much-needed 21st century profession. Just like progress in the medical sciences in the end of the 19th century led to the birth of the medical profession, today we badly need data trustees as the new 21st century profession. Now, just like we don't ask whether doctors' fiduciary responsibilities are really necessary, to ask whether data trustees as a fiduciary intermediary layer is really necessary is to miss the point. The point is that this is a value-based choice. And yes, you can create data collectives based on contract or corporate structures, but no, those contractual or corporate structures will not provide the kind of safeguards that trust can provide and which are much needed given the vulnerabilities at stake. Now, it's time to really get concrete. You'll be happy to hear. If you do go for data trust, you're faced with several implementation choices. And I'll highlight just 3 for now. 1, the governance structure of a data trust can be anything from highly participatory to completely hands-off. 2, you might create a data trust for a particular purpose, like empowering Uber drivers, or you might choose to create a general data trust, which can deal in any kind of data that pertains to the trust beneficiaries. And 3, that's the most important, by the way, the data in a data trust need not be stored centrally. In fact, the data does not need to be pulled at all. It can remain wherever it is, on the servers of Facebook, Google, or whatever. And in that case, the job of the data trustee is to exercise the beneficiaries' data rights on their behalf, to negotiate better terms and conditions with service providers, and data sharing agreements. Now, this is what I hope we eventually get to. Imagine logging in to Google or Amazon, but not with your Gmail account or Amazon credentials. No, you're logging in through your data trust. And from then on out, as you browse and buy, Google and Amazon can only gather data in accordance with the trust terms. So you're reversing the direction of consent, effectively. Now, to get there are questions to answer and challenges to confront. I'm going to just wrap up with 2 of what I take to be the 2 most important challenges. One set of challenges has to do or is related to exit procedures. I think it is absolutely essential that there be a variety of data trusts, each illustrating one way of balancing the data risks and responsibilities. Now you're going to ask, what happens when someone wants to switch trust and leave a trust because their aspirations have changed? How do you determine what data, or at least what is owed to that person? Well, this raises tricky shared provenance issues, which are not unique to data trust, and which can be addressed in advance in the terms of each trust. Now, the other set of challenges has to do with uptake. Many people have a very low level of data awareness. And as a result, the average level of interest in registering with the data trust will be low. So if you don't want data trust to end up being a means of increasing the bargaining power of only the least vulnerable part of the population, several measures can be considered. You can force data collectors to flag up the existence of data trust, or you can create, potentially, a default data trust, where in the absence of choice, you'll be allocated to a data trust with appropriate oversight mechanism, etc. Now, despite these challenges, and there are many, it's a hopeful space. Today, the notion of a right to vote being dependent upon land ownership is completely archaic. And one day, hopefully in the not too distant future, the notion of Facebook and not users controlling their data will be just as archaic.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. And as you can see, I mean, I love every time I hear you talk about that. But as I said in the beginning, this is not where we are. But it is, I think, on some way, really where we need to go, especially that last sentence. And the foundation, one of our main OKRs, I said I wouldn't talk about planning, but one of our main OKRs this year is to carve out a whole bunch of space around data stewardship, with the biggest focus beyond data trust, but also looking at shared data commons around machine learning and so on. So that's something we're really hoping to bring a lot of people around. We already have 2 other fellows, Anouk Roshak and Richard Witt, who are doing related work, and they're going to be doing a workshop on data trust or exploring data stewardship models a little more broadly in the Peking space, which I think is at the Berlin Hotel at 1 o'clock today. So if you want to check out a little bit more work, and I think Sylvie's going to be there as well if you have questions for her. So Peking space at the Berlin Hotel at 1 p.m. So I want to do one last of these talks and then ask Katerina to come up and reflect. And as I said earlier, we've been bringing people also into the company and the foundation with expertise on these topics to help us start to think about them. And Emerging Tech recently brought in Daria Loy, formerly at Intel, to be the head of product and design, and she's going to talk about this from a designer's perspective.
Thanks, Mark. Wow, look at you, my goodness, this is a beautiful view. I just did not expect to be so overwhelmed. You're beautiful, Mozilla, just beautiful. I love it, Wow. Wow. Oh, okay, let me tell you a little bit about the work that I and my team are doing and how blessed we are to be able to do that. So on this slide, what you see are two things. One is the what, and the other side is the how. And there are things that matter very much to me, and actually, you have noticed from the previous fantastic talks, they are really important things. What you focus on and how you do it. So in the case of me and my team, we are very much dedicated to what we call the voice of the user. That is the what we really, really believe in. And the other side is how you do it. Because actually, what you focus on and how you focus on it really matters, makes a huge difference, right? So I can talk about this work that I've done at Intel because it's been published, so it's kind of public. And I want to share it with you because I learned a huge amount of incredible insights from a human-centric perspective on AI. So a couple of years ago, I did this massive study that took me in different countries, and as you can see on the screen with the numbers, but really was a study that was focused on understanding, but what do actual people, everyday people, not the technologists, what do they think about AI? What are their expectations? You know, what are their fears? What are the things that they find exciting or not? You know, what are the thresholds? You know, what are the perceptions? And really wanted to get to the bottom of that because I was in a team where I was surrounded by machine learning and specialists, and there was a lot of things that were really concerning me. And I just wanted to understand, but what about the non-technologists? What do they think about this? And we kind of spent a lot of time interviewing, one-on-one. I spent a lot of time in people's homes, observing how they incorporate these technologies, smart systems in their homes. And I learned a few things, I mean, a lot of things, actually. And today I want to share only a few because we've got a very limited amount of time, but pretty important learnings there to consider. And some of them, I have to tell you, I was very depressed during this study, let me tell you. I'll just share with you, my husband was not very happy with that. I kind of, when you learn things, sometimes they hurt you a bit. And this was one of those cases. But what I've learned, for instance, is what I called the domino effect of smart things. So when I started going in people's homes and observing how they use these technologies, this is a woman that we call, for the purpose of this talk, obviously not her real name, we call her Catherine. And she actually personifies a lot of the things that ultimately the entire study highlighted. And the first point is domino effect of smart things, which is once you get a taste for one of these smart items, you bring in your home. And in her case, she was very skeptical, actually, of these devices. But once you get a taste, a lot of people started buying more and more, more and more and more, which I'm sure makes very happy the people that sell that. But the more and more they bought those systems, the less and less they seem to realize the impact that these devices were making in their lives, and also the implications of that data collection in their life. They seem just not to, you know, maybe notice it anymore, or maybe it was not important anymore. And this is really very well articulated by vast majority of the users that I interviewed, actually, who were very aware of it. Right? We're aware of what the implications of having all these devices in their home actually really meant. They were aware of the risks, but they were willing to compromise. And by the way, this is actually a quote from one of the participants. Willing to compromise because they saw a return on investment. There was something for them important. And we can like it or not, but That's the reality. Before, a lot of people, including myself, put up our hands when Mark asked, do you have a device? Do you think it's creepy? The same people lifted their hands twice, and there is a reason for that. There is a return on investment, which hides into that a lot of problems, right? And the return on investment, what I found, is what people called over and over helper usages, like things that make you feel that you can actually do little things that you really don't want to bother with in your everyday life, so you feel like you're being helped. Those were the cases where people felt, I am willing to compromise because I feel that I'm getting a return on investment that is willing, that makes me willing. And of course, a lot of problems with that, but that's the reality. The other thing that was fascinating was actually, which is really fascinating, was that these technologies are designed in a way to predict your behavior. And people kept on telling me, well, actually, I don't like to feel so predictable because, we actually like to feel unique. We are unique. But a lot of people felt this tension of, this technology maybe is getting a bit too far in trying to make me feel predictable and boring in a way, and I don't want that. And the other thing that I found, that non-surprisingly, is that there was this kind of power relationship, a really strong power relationship. In fact, a lot of people told me, I want to be boss. I don't want these technologies to control me. I want to control them. Right? So there's got a very strong sense of, discomfort with having this technology in their lives. But still, this technology were in their lives, are in their lives, and will be in their lives. And then another very interesting, this actually was when my depression kind of went away, thankfully. But this is when actually people told me, you know what, if I could tell you what I want these technologies to do for me, I want to have companionship, but not as in companionship with the technology. I want these technologies to connect me with other people, with my community. This is what I want technology to do for me, right? I don't want it to control me. I want it to connect me because we are feeling so disconnected. So what? So I learned a lot. So what do we do? What do we Mozilla do with that? There's a lot of things we can do with that, a lot. I'm going to just share 3. The first one is what I call minimize intrusion mantra. And it really is about a less is more, that approach. I'm an architect, so less is more is a little bit of a thing we say a lot. But it's really about the fact that you can collect a huge amount of data doesn't mean you should. It doesn't mean you should. It's as simple as that. You need to, and as a technologist, I always challenge the engineers that I work with at Intel, like, you're so smart. Can you design a way in which you can have a great outcome without collecting all this data? I know that the more you collect, the better your algorithms get. But is that the only way in which you can apply your smartness to this technology? Just challenge yourself a bit. Second, socially trusted and trustworthy platforms is what we need to design. We had a great example, in the previous presentation from Sylvie about that. There's a lot can be done there. Third, if we have to use this technology and we kind of can really benefit from them, let's prioritize what really matters for people. The fact that you can do something doesn't mean you should. Let's question things a bit as designers and creatives. So let me tell you, though, I'm very much of an optimist. I got out of that depression moment. And I'm an optimist. I think we humans are so powerful. We've got a heart. We've got a soul. We're capable of doing greatness. So I'm very much an optimist. So let me tell you some visions of the future that we can create, right? So imagine if we can leverage these technologies, a mix of AI with ambient computing, and focus on things that matter. For instance, contextual understanding applied to things like social isolation is a huge problem. This is a problem worth considering. There are so many problems worth considering and addressing. And AI can help us, actually, do something about it. In fact, Mozilla could play a great role in that, with this trustee example that we were talking about earlier. Imagine a future where we can use ambient computing mixed together with AI to detect anomalies real time. Simple things. Maybe in your home, you want to be able to protect your home, your family, your belongings. You want to be able, with simple sensors, to be able to detect if there are deteriorations in your home. Maybe there is a leak in a roof. These are simple things, simple everyday problems that people have. One thing that I learned from the research is that people want to use this technology to save money, save energy. save stress time. They really want to live a better life. They want to be enriched. Why can't we use that technology for that? Another thing, for instance, imagine a future where you can apply this technology. In fact, I've done some work on this topic back in Portland. Think about applying this technology for things, for instance, like promoting wellness, focusing on cognitive deterioration. There is a lot of things you can do with analytics to predict things like Alzheimer's, for instance. I mean, these are real problems. This is why we should use these technologies, not for things, that really don't matter, that don't change life. Those are the problems that really matter. There are so many of them that need and actually deserve to be addressed. So this is kind of some of the space that with my team we are tackling. We call it intelligent agents in spaces, but it's really what is the future we want to see. When you utilize AI together with different fusion of different sensors and different data points to actually improve life, to really empower people on their terms. What are the beautiful things we can do with this technology? Because, of course, there is a lot of not beautiful things we can do, but that's not the one that I care about. I want to make life better, for the future generations, for the current generation. That is what is, in my opinion, worth pursuing. So I want to sort of leave you with this. In fact, I want to edit myself right now. We must play a role. We must. This is not just an opportunity that Mozilla has. This is, in my opinion, actually a responsibility. We are the best, from that perspective. You are the ones that can make this happen, right? So we can play a key role. And, going back to the beginning and reflecting on my fantastic previous presenters, all of them told you stories about the what and the how. What you focus on matters. And how you get it done matters. And so, I see myself, and I think all of us, we've got two options to some degree. One is to walk on a path, and on that path, there is a future that is worth inhabiting. It's a future, that is really we want to have. And we have the opportunity to create that future. We have the opportunity to use those technologies for that future. On the other side, I can walk, and I can see it happen, because it's going to happen. Right? On one side, you're going to find that those technologies, they're going to actually control us. We're going to be powerless. We're going to have powered. We can actually be enriched. We can be in control in a place where actually this technology, we can trust them because they've been designed with the how in mind and the what in mind, that really makes a difference. And so I have no doubts of which path I want to walk on. I'm pretty sure that Mozilla wants to walk on a path of creating a future that is worth inhabiting. And I really hope to have an opportunity to collaborate with a lot of you to make the beautiful future happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. Thank you, Daria. And I think there's a lot of similarities between your bad future here and the good future here, which were in line with Mitchell's mountains from yesterday. So you picked the right sides of the stage. And so you can see in those last three talks, that idea that I was referencing of Dave's yesterday, that we need people from a lot of different disciplines, and not just engineers and lawyers and designers, but certainly that, to think about how we carve this path forward. And certainly the foundations programs are going to be very focused on how do we bring more of those people around Mozilla, how do we engage with MoCo, how do we engage with industry on breaking through the ice with that kind of set of thinking and much, much more that you heard this morning. But I think also where AI fits in is AI does fit into the questions of innovation that Mitchell and Katerina and all of us were asking about yesterday and talking about yesterday, and that we will look at into the future. So I wanted to ask Katerina to come up just to talk a little bit about how we think about AI in the context of the innovation process, and also some stuff you'll be able to take a peek at in this afternoon's open house.
Oh, you need a clicker.
those are still your slides. Oh, these are my slides. Good morning, Berlin. Thank you. I am super excited to be here with you again this morning, but I'm particularly excited to, especially after listening to all these great talks, to dig more into the rich and meaty content and substance of innovation. After all that talk about Innovationsprozess, Zwischenstandsbeschreibungsskizze yesterday. I cannot do this well without slides. And what I'm also, I walked up here a little bit under-caffeinated this morning, and now I'm like really jazzed up and excited because I have not seen so many inspiring things and seen so much alignment between all the different parts of our broader Mozilla universe in many years. And I wish I could say that, you know, we in leadership have carefully orchestrated this, and we had carved out. We knew that years ago that we were going to get here, but if I said that, you wouldn't believe me anyway. And so it is all the better to see that all of our principles and our passions and our curiosity have taken us to this point, even though we all pursued different paths and approaches, and we've come from different directions. Those of you who know me also know that I'm not just a woman of many words, but I'm also a woman of strong opinions. And I love to see so many people show up with strong opinions and with so many ideas and approaches based on these strong opinions. We are most likely not always right in every detail, but I'm beginning to see this clear path forward and the clear will to walk this path and take this. So let me dive just briefly a little bit into the work we have done over the last couple of weeks on the topic of surveillance economy, which is one of these 8 broader innovation themes that Mitchell outlined. But you will pretty quickly see that I'm not switching tracks. It completely aligns with much that we've heard this morning and with the overall topic of today's plenary of AI. Keep in mind that everything you're seeing here now are what I think are super exciting and certainly opinionated concepts, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily already the right concepts. It also doesn't mean that we've already made any decisions. As you know, there's now an Innovationsprozess for that. But that also means that right now is exactly the right time for you to investigate these, to call us out on things that you think are wrong, to add your own ideas, to build on this, to refine this, to shape it, so that we can possibly make decisions around this, put this into one of these studios. And so what we are showing you and what you have the opportunity this afternoon to investigate further, debate with us, add to that, hack on, are 3 different ideas that are tackling some of the core consumer and ecosystem problems of the surveillance economy. And for each of the 3, we've kind of sketched out 3 different stages of how do we get from this mess we're in right now to a much better future vision in 3 to 5 years. And personally, I'm particularly excited about this first concept of powering up consent and identity. Because what we're trying to do, we have talked about user privacy for years. We have built super great privacy-first, user-empowering tools. And yet, we have made tweaks and changes in little dents, but overall, even to Germans who we generally perceive as the most tinfoil hat-wearing of our core markets, and everybody's very privacy concerned, their user behaviors are still mostly the same. Privacy concerns go out of the window, and exactly through the same window that convenience comes in. So privacy stays a pretty abstract concept. But when you switch the narrative from privacy to your personal identity, it suddenly changes. At least it changed a lot for me and the many people that I talk to, because we all only show different parts of our identity in different situations and different times of the day. Okay, my stage identity is not that different, but my work identity is not exactly the same as my chatting to a taxi driver or my home identity. And that is a totally natural concept for us. Yet, online, we are our full selves at all times, thanks to non-stop data collection. Imagine walking into a coffee shop in the morning and saying, I would like a cappuccino with a double shot of espresso because, you know, I'm really tired. I got sucked into that flat earth YouTube rabbit hole until 2 a.m. And when I was done with that, I was like, my hammer toes were really hurting. And so I briefly, and I do not have hammer toes, just for the record. I'm making this up. So my hammer toes were really hurting, but then I found these great insoles on Amazon, and while I was at it, I was ordering, yes, at this point, you'd get served your coffee, and then these really nice guys would come in and carefully escort you outside. And yet, this is exactly what we do online every day, without thinking twice about it. And so I found this just switching the narrative and then building tools that allow us to have more variable, more dynamic identities online and be the hammer toe person when I go into a medical search and be the, if you must, the flat earth person on YouTube and empowering users in that way instead of constantly trying to educate them and get them to do the right thing. And I think then the next step, a really interesting one, that picks up, incidentally, a lot of the land-hold society concept is, well, what if we had all these different, these more dynamic identity controls, and we had the power to collectively manage consent for the different parts of our identities, join up with all the hammer toe people, have the coffee consent conversation and the coffee consent negotiation. And admittedly, looking at consent through a collectivist lens might be a very European approach because American society tends more towards individualistic approaches, but this is really the only power that we have here. And the second concept that we started exploring also builds very much on the power back in the hands of the people. Imagine a future where data sets are no longer treated like super confidential business assets, where every facet of your life becomes part of this asset that you don't own any longer, but more as a dynamic, accessible, and open, transparent resource for everyone, where we, again, can collectively negotiate what goes in, who has access to it, what is the value of it. And AI-driven systems could prioritize people's control. They could be based on a really high-quality, ethically sourced data set. Maybe in the long term, making AI less biased, organic, grass-fed. Wait, that was a different talk. And it might also make AI impacts much more transparent. And so what are the different stages of that? How can you open this black box? What can we build collectively? And then the third one might be, the third concept we're playing around might a little bit be the furthest out there, but it is also immediately building on some of the things that we've been doing at Mozilla for years. We have done so much great work, first designing lean data principles, implementing them into our own tools, but also spreading the message across the globe, going out there, teaching regulators, teaching businesses about lean data practices and how to be more principled in their own businesses. But that's often not the way economies work, and it is also really hard for businesses to actually build the systems and implement these good data practices. So what if we help them build it? Because, as I said, good compliance, good data principles are really hard, but maybe we can help with more than just the principles and dive deeper into the practices as well. If this gets you either really excited or really riled up because it is the wrong approach, that is great, because it only shows how important these conversations are, how important these explorations are, how with these overall topics, there might be 8 different overall themes on here, but the majority of them are so intertwined that I wouldn't even know how to separate the surveillance economy from artificial intelligence, from user sovereignty over data, identity systems. That is also immediately tied into content discovery. So I invite you again, whether you're passionate, excited, or just really mad at us for the ideas we're throwing out here, join us this afternoon. This hotel, the Kaminzimmer, from 1 to 6 p.m. Dig deeper into these concepts, these principles, learn a little bit about all the research and the background that went into this. Be passionate, be opinionated. If you don't have time this afternoon, you can still be a part of it. We'll keep you updated. There'll be more opportunities to debate with us, to hack on this. And do me a huge favor. Let's get together, let's move fast, and let's build the right things. And let's stop with this cowboy nonsense of move fast and breaking things. Let's move fast, let's build the right things, and thank you. And if we absolutely must break things, let's make sure we break the right things along the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I like the idea of breaking the right things along the way. So I think you can see how these things connect. I mean, they're not all, as Katarina said, some magic plan. The idea is really to show there's a direction here that we can be going. There's a place that we can carve a path through the ice. And there's a lot of thinking already going on. And I think most importantly, there's an invitation, whether that's through the innovation process, through the work that MoFo is doing, through what you're doing day to day and what you decide with your teams and your managers is important to get your goals done with data and AI. I think there's an invitation to be thinking about where we can chart a path. So we got some answers to the why, I think some good ones. There's more to be had to the why now. Just a quick last moment on why us. We've always thought as Mozilla, and Amba talked about this, that we can shape where computing is going in some way, and that has an impact on digital life and on human life. And the good news is there's a whole posse of people out there, some of them in companies and in startups, some of them in big companies, people doing AI principles, who also think this current era of computing needs to be shaped in a different direction than it is going. And there's a huge amount of overlap between what that whole posse is thinking about and what we've been talking about for 20 years. A lot of the same words are in there: privacy, transparency, enriching the lives of individual human beings. So, I mean, it feels like we should move forward in trying to drive where things go next. And if you wanted to, say, 20 years ago, do the same thing, drive forward with where you want to go next, what would you have done? You might have built a browser. And if you'd started building a browser, say in 1998, when the Mozilla project was set up and Microsoft dominated the market, it might have felt like there was a lot of ice ahead of you. And what you would do is, you start with your mission, and you'd have an army of volunteers, and you'd take donations from supporters, and you might be a nonprofit. And it'd be only through doggedly building that technology, and in the case of Firefox, over 5 years, that you embedded your values in and finally also found a way to do that and delight users that you'd break through. And it'd only be then that you'd find a business model and grow revenue and gain enough momentum to truly change the world, which we did. We moved computing from being, and we moved the internet from being sucked back into Windows which is what was happening, to the era of Ajax and cloud computing. And we did that through patience, through vision, through bringing others along, being focused on our mission. And eventually it did work out. We do have resources, and we have the resources to go elsewhere. So I don't think we have 5 years to figure out what's next. Certainly if Roxy were here, she probably would say it's not 5 years. But we also have much more in terms of resources, much more in terms of clarity, much more in terms of a head start, in terms of how we take our mission and our community and carve through the ice. Lots of people are building technology. In fact, most people are building technology with data and AI. Few people are offering a concrete vision of what a healthier approach to the world of AI and data could look like, and then building things on top of it. Mozilla and the people we work with, the people Amba talked about, are really poised well to do it right now. And I'm hoping that that's a part of what we do as we walk in this path to the future, is we do that. We seize that and we do that right now. Thank you very much.